So, have you heard of the prisoner's dilemma?
Mm, I feel like I've heard of it, but I don't recall it now.
Okay, so today I'll talk about this. So, this is the scenario here. So, suppose you and some other person, you have decided to, let's say, rob a museum, get some, like, steal some jewelry from the museum. So, you stole it, but on the way out, the guards came to know that they called the police. So, you stole it, but on the way, the guards realized that yes, something's going on. They called the police and he decided to hide it somewhere. And he decided that okay, we're going to escape now. We're going to hide it, and maybe we'll take it. We'll come back again and take the jewelry later on. But you were caught within the premises of the museum, and so you're taken to custody right now. So far, the only evidence that the police have is that they caught you in the premises. So regardless of someone steals something or not, to be in the premises of a museum at a time that is not normal is suspicious. That's enough to send you to jail for 1 year. But suppose if they prove that you also, on top of that, you also stole, then the, the jail period could be higher. Plus, they also have the pressure of trying to figure out who stole the jewelry. So they have very high suspicions on you and your and the other person, but they do not have any definitive proof. The only proof that they have is that uh, you were caught in the premises. So they can send you for jail for 1 year. That's guaranteed. So now what they're trying to do is this. They take you and your other person to two different rooms, and then they give you this proposal that if you confess that you have committed the crime, you have stolen the jewelry, we will let you go free right now. You don't have to go to jail, not even for trespassing. That 1 year, even we are going to cancel that. You can walk away right now. But your partner will go to jail for 10 years. And the same offer has been given to him. So this table shows you the scenarios. So suppose
Mm-hmm.
let's say you are player one and your partner is player two. So it says that player one, if you confess and if your partner both confesses, then you both go to jail for 6 years. But if you do not confess, the first one, okay, wait a minute. Yes. So player one, okay, and if you decide to confess and your partner does not confess, then as the deal says, you're going to walk away free, zero. But the partner is going to get 10 years in jail. Now
Mm-hmm.
coming to the second row, where you choose not to confess. So you choose not to confess, but your partner chooses to confess. In that case, you're going to get 10 years in jail, but your partner is going to walk away for free. And finally, if both of you decide that both of us aren't going to confess, so both of you will only get 1 year each because of being caught for trespassing. So they do not have any evidence about that you have stolen the jewelry. So both of you will get 1 year, 1 year jail. So what would you do in this scenario?
Me.
Yes.
Mm, well, I will probably won't confess.
You'll not confess.
Yeah, and I will also assume that the other person with me will also not confess. So I think I'm thinking it will be minus one for both of us.
Yes. So that's in ideally that should be the ideal case scenario. But uh, it requires a lot of assumptions. Like you have to assume that the other person is not also he is also not going to confess. So what if this person you only planned this robbery just a week ago? You just met this person. You don't know this
Yeah.
person. So that could be one scenario. So that could so
So
how
the background
trust
of both the person, how long they've known each other, how much is the trust between them, etc. So the entire context will decide what both of them are going to choose. But the ideal situation here would be both of them go for 1 year.
us. Yes, means that's the ideal case scenario.
Mm.
I mean, in in the arguments that people make is that in real life there are consequences to betrayal. Like if especially if that person is someone you have to work with for a long time, or if you are suppose part of a criminal gang. So in such scenarios, betrayal means you cannot escape. Ultimately, the gang will come on you and will kill you for betraying one of the team members. But if you're a smaller person, like a regular person, I think it is actually more difficult to cooperate because if you're someone who is in a position of power, then I mean, in everyday life, like in work, in our lives, if trust is very hard to come by because we usually people usually act on their own self-interest. And here, if you look at it, if now take another scenario. Now, suppose if you want to just act in a way that maximizes your own outcome, from that point of view, if you think, what could be the decision if you're trying to
So
maximize your own outcome?
if I'm trying to maximize my own outcome
Yeah.
without caring for the other person at all, so I will
Yes.
choose to confess, and I will most likely assume they will not confess. But talking about trust also here, I think usually when we talk about or people talk about trusting other person, we will talk about it in general terms, like I trust that person also. But in reality, trust is like it's specific to things. For example, I might trust someone for other things, but if I know that he doesn't know how to drive a car, I will not trust him. Even though I trust him as a person, I will not trust him to drive the car when I'm sitting in the passenger seat. So in this kind of situation, if the person that I'm robbing the bank with, I have never robbed the bank with him even once before, then in the back of my mind, I will have this doubt: will he confess that we did this actually? So that doubt will creep in. But if I have done this with him before many times, then I have trust in that specific things with him. At that point, I can take the risk of not confessing because I've gone through this exact thing with that person. So we have built that trust on this particular thing. So that is why I think trust is also not just a general concept, but applies to specific things to specific people.
Yes. So the thing here is that even though 1 year and the bottom, what is it? The bottom right corner. Yes. Yeah, 1 1. 1 1, even if 1 1 is the ideal case output that both party wants, it is actually not natural. It requires some form of external, I would say, agreements of some sort for it to be enforced. Because so naturally, what's going to happen? So as you yourself have said, like if you know this person, only then that is going to happen. Like that trust is going to happen. So that itself is somewhat, I won't say forced, but it's not natural. That means if two people randomly meet, the trust is not natural. They have to be working together. So there are different ways you can build, you can enforce trust. The thing is that first of all, if you know each other for years, you are friends, or maybe you are family members. So in such kind of scenarios, trust is built. Other ways are like coming up with a formal contract. So those kind of things that they build, like they force certain kind of outcomes. Like, okay, suppose even if I meet someone 1 week before I rob a bank with him, we said, okay, we enter an agreement. Okay, if you try to betray us, there will be certain parties or certain assassins we have pre-hired, so you can't actually escape from me. So those are artificially enforced mechanisms that is trying to get us into -1, -1. But naturally, the so the people who have created this puzzle, their assumption is that by default people think for themselves, and in their own greed for themselves, they are going to end up in a suboptimal output outcome. And here's the logic that they give. So suppose you are player one, you and as I said, if you are trying to think from your own self-interest, what's the best thing you should do? So let's look at so you're going to predict what player two is going to do, and based on that, you will see what's best for you. Suppose you assume that, okay, what if my partner confesses? So that means we look at first column. Player two is your partner. He confesses. So in that case, you have two options. You can either confess, you can choose not to confess. And your output is this one, the first entry. Okay. So so suppose he tries to he confesses, and you decide not to confess. That means you get a penalty of 10 years. On the other hand, if you decide to confess, you get a penalty of -6 years. So if you compare -6 and -10, like 10 years in jail versus 6 years in jail, obviously 6 years is better than 10 years in jail. So if player 2 decides to confess, you should also confess, -6. On the other hand, if player 2 decides not to confess, then should you confess or should you not confess? So again, suppose you decided, okay, if he doesn't confess, I will also not confess. In that case, you get 1 year in jail. But if he doesn't confess and you decide to confess, then you get 0 years in jail. So if you compare my 1 year in jail versus 0 year in jail, obviously 0 year in jail is better than 1 year in jail. So even though this -1 looks better, but if you're thinking in your own self-interest, why would you even go for 1 year in jail when you can confess and go for 0 year in jail right now? So again, even if player 2 does not confess, your best option is still to confess. So ultimately, the conclusion is that regardless of your opponent, decides to confess or not to confess, you should confess either way, because either way you're going to get the best outcome. So if you confess and he confesses, then you'll get 6 years instead of 10 years. And if you confess and he doesn't confess, then you get 0 years instead of 1 years. So confessing will always give you the better outcome relative to not confessing, regardless of what the player two does. And similarly, the player two will also think in the same way. He'll think about the same way. And ultimately, both of you will end up in 6-6. Because again, the player will think, okay, should I confess or not confess? What if he decides not to confess? Okay, then in that case, I should confess. So that means these are the two options that player two has. So if he will say, okay, my partner has decided not to, if he decides not to confess, then I can choose to not confess and also stay 1 year in jail, or I can choose to confess and walk away right now. So obviously confessing is better option for me. Again, he'll think about the other alternative. What if my partner confesses? Well, in that case, if I do not confess, then I'm going to stay 10 years in jail. But if I also confess, then I'll only stay 6 years in jail. So even he'll think, okay, so regardless of what my partner does, I think I should confess because it will give me the better outcome either way. So ultimately, both of you will end up confessing, and both of you are going to stay safe 6 years in jail. So this is when you both think selfishly only about your own outcome and end up in a suboptimal solution. So did you understand what happened here?
Yeah, both essentially in looking for the best option for themselves ended up in not the best one in a way.
Yes.
But is there any market, well, not market, I mean like a study or survey done simulating this environment, and what is there any result like this showing what the majority would choose?
Yes, I haven't looked into it, whether it's done or not. But this is a this is a very theoretical kind of situation. It's for example, like every subject has their first initial example, like the Hello World program. Like it's not realistic, not practical, but it introduces the subject. Like suppose, for example, when you study physics in school, 11, 12. Like there are some very simple things like G equal to 9.8 or G equal to 10. But if you use actually, so what I'm trying to say is that this is a very rudimentary example. If you like further study game theory, there are multiple complexities added to it to simulate the real world. So I haven't seen whether this theoretical thing is practically there or not. And even if it's there, I don't know how much that experiment is going to give insight into the real world thinking of people, because it's too simplistic.
Hmm.
But it introduces the topic. That could be said. So, but still, let me look at it if there are any experiments there or not. I think there are some other examples. Let me see.
What is the battle of the sexes in game theory? And this is one of the classic games where we have a specific story in a weird scenario, a little bit weird, but it represents broadly other scenarios you're going to observe in the real world, if you can recognize these game theory patterns. So the setup for the classic game is you have a man and a woman in a relationship. They want to be doing the same thing, and they would much prefer to do something together than separately. But the two possible options, ballet and football, the woman prefers ballet, the man prefers football. So if we solve this situation, like if we're at ballet, they both like this better than being alone, but the woman really likes it and the man just sort of likes it, whereas the reverse is true on football. Now let's solve for Nash equilibrium. And we can see that we have two Nash equilibrium, but that one person prefers one equilibrium, the other person prefers the other equilibrium, and that the off equilibrium scenarios are worse for both players than either Nash equilibrium. And those are going to be the three traits of a battle of the sexes scenario. So let me write those down. Now, if we look at this second trait, the fact that each player has a different favorite Nash equilibrium, what that means is that there's actually kind of a winner and a loser. And what makes this really interesting is that this is a cooperative game. The two players are trying to cooperate with each other to avoid these off equilibrium, each person going off and doing their own thing. But at the same time, while there's cooperation, there's also competition, because there's kind of a winner and a loser between the cooperative outcomes. And you see this all over the place. For example, in any scenario where you have a group of people who are making a decision and they know they have to work together for that decision, but some people have one opinion about what they should do, other people have another opinion about what they should do. It's this exact setup where there will be a winner and a loser, even though there's cooperation deeply built into that game. And I think sometimes economists will think of cooperation and competition as opposites, like polar opposites. This really shows us actually in a lot of scenarios where there is cooperation, there's also competition going on. And in a lot of situations where there's competition, there may actually be cooperation as well. And how those two things are intermeshed is really, really important. And then, of course, I do want to point out that if you just go with the first two traits of this game, two Nash, and each player has a different preferred Nash, that's actually not enough to get you a Battle of the Sexes game, because the game of chicken, which is a different classic game theory setup, actually meets these first two criteria. So if you want to distinguish it from the game of chicken, you need this third criteria, which are that the off equilibrium are actually worse for both players than either Nash, meaning they both really want to avoid these off equilibria. And in game of chicken, that's not necessarily going to be the case. So the off equilibrium does matter. It matters for how games play out. And that's just a quick overview of Battle of the Sexes in game theory.
Well, actually, I didn't understand much about this. Yes,
I also did not really understand what you were trying to say.
actually, there was some other. Let me look at some other one, because this is the first time I watched that video. So, but there's another one that I watched previously.
Hi, I'm William Spaniel. Let's learn some game theory. Today's topic is the stag hunt and pure strategy Nash equilibrium, and I cover this topic in lesson 1.3 of Game Theory 101, the complete textbook. Check the video description for more information about that. Here's the situation. We have two hunters going out to catch meat. There are two hares in the range and one stag. The hunters can only bring the equipment necessary to catch one type of animal, and they have to choose this equipment without seeing what the other one is going to choose. They can't really coordinate here directly. The stag is going to be worth a lot more meat than the hares combined. In fact, we're going to make it worth 6 units of meat, while each of the individual hares is only worth 1 unit of meat. But the stag is really tricky to catch, and the hunters need to actually both be trying to catch the stag in order to essentially trap it and kill it. So in order to get the stag, both of them have to choose the stag hunting equipment in order to be able to get it. In contrast, hares are really easy to catch, and so if you're a hare hunter, you can capture all of the prey without the help of the other guy. So if we condense this information into a payoff matrix, here's what it looks like. We have two players, player 1, player 2. Each of them can choose to hunt a stag or hunt a hare. If they both hunt a stag, then they coordinate and everything works pretty well. They get to capture the 6 units of meat and split it evenly between them 3 apiece. If one tries to capture a stag and the other captures a hare, like in this outcome right here, the player who's hunting a stag, in this case player 2, fails because she needs the help of player 1 in order to capture the stag, and so she gets 0. Meanwhile, player 1 is left to capture both of the hares by himself, so that means he gets 2 units of meat. Lastly, in this outcome right here, both of them choose to hunt a hare, and so they split the 2 hares evenly, 1 hare apiece. Now, in the last 2 videos, we solved games.
So did you understand the setup here? What he said?
Yeah, I'm seeing the pattern now where basically I understand the pattern how they are splitting into the matrix here.
Okay.
But here it is the opposite in the sense like the optimal outcome is the top left. That is both of them decide. Both of them have to agree to get the stag, then they will get the most amount of meat, which is the ideal situation.
Yes, that is true.
But the pattern is like divided. Yeah, go on.
Yes, but again, I think the previous video, she mentioned something called the Nash equilibrium. So in the prisoner's dilemma, so Nash equilibrium doesn't mean the global optimum. It means that when you think selfishly of yourself, when both parties think selfishly of themselves, and whatever the end cell that they reach in, which in that case it was -6, that's the Nash equilibrium. So even in here, there will be 2 Nash equilibriums. As you will see, this will also be a Nash equilibrium, 3, and 1, as well. And the same logic will be applied, and you can see how it will be there. But did you want to say anything else?
No.
Okay, let's see how he explains, then maybe I'll put my perspective into that. So so when I say Nash equilibrium, so what I'm trying to say is that normally there is a standard way of solving this kind of problems, which is like, again, thinking from a single player's selfish perspective. Like, if I want to maximize my own personal outcome, what kind of decisions should I be making? That is the approach that is actually it's normally used to solve this kind of problems, as you'll see now how it is.
By looking for strictly dominated strategies, but here that's not going to take us anywhere. Let's see why. Suppose player 1 knew that player 2 is going to hunt a stag. Player 2 in this case, or player 1 in this case, should also hunt a stag because 3 is greater than 2. But if player 1 knows that player 2 will be hunting a hare, then player 1 should also hunt a hare. The reason is because if he hunts a stag by himself, he's going to fail and get 0. If he goes out and hunts a hare, then at least he gets 1. So player 1's strategy, our optimal strategy, is completely dependent on player 2's choice. And the same is true for player 2. This game's completely symmetrical in that respect. So player 2 only wants to hunt a stag if player 1 is hunting a stag, and only wants to hunt a hare if player 1 is hunting a hare. And so as a result, there isn't a strictly dominated strategy for either player here. Now, given what we know about game theory for now, we can't really solve this game in any meaningful way without any further rules to implement into the game in order to figure out what is a sensible outcome here. So we're going to introduce a new way to solve a game and understand what's sensible in that regard. And we call this Nash equilibrium. So a Nash equilibrium is a set of strategies, one for each player, such that no player has incentive to change his or her strategy. Now, a couple of notes about this. We only care about individual deviations, not group deviations. So if we're checking whether some outcome is a Nash equilibrium, we don't have to see if both players can collectively change their strategies to different strategies. We only have to worry about, can one player change his strategy and do better, or can the other player change her strategy and do better? We're just worried about individual deviations, not group deviations. Now, the reason that Nash equilibria are compelling is that they're inherently stable. What you're doing is optimal given what I'm doing, and vice versa. So this means once we've actually seen the outcome of the game, once we've chosen our strategies and the strategies are revealed, we don't have any regrets about what we've done. I'm happy with what I've done, and you're happy with what you've done. We can't change our strategies in retrospect individually and do any better. So let's see this in practice. How does this work? Well, how do we find these now?
So again, he has said multiple times about thinking from your own personal perspective, not as a group perspective. So it has some use cases like thinking from that perspective, like if you're trying to create game theory scenarios in which you cannot influence the decision of the other party. Like for example, you are a country, you are trying to anticipate the war, you're in a war with some other country, and you're trying to anticipate the move of the other countries. So there, at that scenario, you can't just call the other country and say, "So, what is your plan? Are you going to attack here?" Because if you're going to attack here, because right now I'm confused. I want to send my army. So if you can just inform me and tell me if you're going to attack here, I'm going to send my army. So what? He's a fool. Like, am I going to inform you? Like, okay, okay, please, I'm going to attack here. Can you just send your army so that we can have some fun? No, if I'm going to attack here, I'm going to try my best not to let you inform you that I'm going to be sending anything. So in that case, I'm going to assume something like, okay, if he attacks this, what should I do? And if he doesn't attack this, then what should I do? So in that case, I do not have full information. So I'm only going to assume the scenarios, how it's going to happen. So this is the spirit behind where this could be used.
Nash equilibria. There are 4 different outcomes here. So what we're going to do to see if any of these are Nash equilibria is we're going to isolate that outcome and look to see if if any of the players can individually do better by changing their strategies. So let's start out by looking at the stag outcome. Would any player want to change his or her strategy given that both players are going to be playing stag? Well, player 1 would not want to change his strategy because he's getting 3 for hunting the stag and only 2 for hunting a hare, so he's satisfied maintaining his strategy. And player 2 is also in the same boat, right? She gets 3 for hunting the stag and only 2 for hunting the hare, so she's happy maintaining her stag strategy. And so we know that this outcome right here, the stag outcome, is a Nash equilibrium. Every player is happy with this outcome. Neither player can change his or her strategy and expect to do better. Now, this should be intuitive because the stag outcome represents the best possible outcome for both players, right? They both get 3 in this situation, and these 3 points is better than any other outcome for both of the players. So we should expect this to be a stable strategy, given that it's the best thing that both players can do. But we need to check to see if there are more Nash equilibria in this game.
Okay, now let me just try to talk here. So unlike the previous ones, where we both get 1 year in jail and escape with a lesser punishment. So that was not a Nash equilibrium. That is why, even though ideally it seems the best option, but if you think selfishly, you will never be able to reach that equilibrium. You won't be able to reach that state. But here you can reach that even if you think selfishly. So that's the difference here. So that's what it's saying. So suppose again you are player 1 and I'm player 2. And suppose you think, okay, let me see how's happening. Suppose I decide to go for the stag. So that means we are only looking at the first column here. Is there a way somewhere where there is not? Yes. So I have decided to go for the stag. Now, actually, I have not decided to go for the stag. You are not thinking selfishly from your perspective what to do. So you are thinking, okay, case here, case one, what can Rohan do? So one thing he can do is that he can go for the stag. Now I'm talking from your perspective. So you can say, okay, what if Rohan goes for the stag? In that case, what should I do? Should I also go for the stag or should I go for the hare? So this one on the left is your payoff, your outcome. So you can say, okay, if Rohan goes for the stag and I go for the stag, I get 3. But if I go for the hare, even though Rohan will get nothing, he'll get 0. But for me also, I'm going to be at a loss. I'll get 2. Whereas I could have gotten 3 if I had gone for a stag. So for me, like from your perspective, you'll think that okay, stag is going for the stag is a better option. If Rohan goes for the stag. Now we'll look at the other option. What if Rohan goes for hare? In that case, if I decide to go for stag, what's going to happen? You're going to get 0, nothing. On the other hand, if you also go for hare, you'll at least get something 1. So here too, you're better. In this case, your best decision would be to go for the hare. So suppose so this is the scenario planning you have already done before both of us go into the forest for hunting. So that we know, okay, if Rohan goes for a stag, I should also go for stag because it will give me the better outcome. But if Rohan goes for hare, I shouldn't go for stag because I'll get nothing there. I should also go for hare. So as you've seen, like you're thinking about your own selfish like perspective. And similarly, I'll think about from my own selfish perspective. And for me also, if you go for hare, I'll go for hare. But if you go for stag, then I'll also go for stag. So in that case, ultimately there are two possible outcomes. Either we both go for stag or we both go for hare. So eventually, so that is why there are two kind of equilibriums here, which in this scenario they are known as Nash equilibriums. But let's not think about those kind of terminologies. Like intuitively, you understand why these two are sort of equilibriums. Like we reach these two conclusions by thinking selfishly, not because like you and I have decided to communicate and strategize and come together. We did not communicate each other. We just anticipated what could the other person what move he could make, and based on that was the best thing that I could do. Did you get any idea?
Understood, yeah.
Yeah. So I think we have less than 1 minute now.
Okay. So all
Yeah.
of this kind of things are called game theory.
Yes. So these are some of the very basic ones. There are many complicated ones as well. So
And this
yeah.
is like a branch of philosophy, or what is it? Social sciences.
Yeah, I think it's mostly studied in political science, but it's sort of mathematics, kind of mathematics and philosophical logic combined, but mostly mathematics.